mayor is on her way.
On her way.
And we'll go ahead and get
There are
started.
a lot of speakers, so show up.
Yeah, and good morning, buenos dias. How's everyone doing? Excited to be here? My name is Arnulfo de la Cruz, president of SEIU 2015. And SEIU 2015, we're honored to host so many of California's wonderful leaders here today, both elected officials and community allies. As the union of more than 450,000 California caregivers, the issue of mental health is a critical component of the future of care. And that's why we're so excited to support Proposition 1. Proposition 1 will provide treatment, not tents, for Californians who need help the most. Decades ago, California politicians shut down state psychiatric hospitals, leaving people with serious mental illness to fend for themselves. 37,000 beds dwindled to just over 5,000. Many of those impacted ended up on the streets. Mental health treatment has been underfunded for decades, and the COVID pandemic only really shed light on this important issue. Currently, those with serious mental health issues can wait sometimes up to 6 months or longer just for an introductory appointment. Proposition 1 will help fund additional professionals so that people with mental health needs can get help much more quickly. Proposition 1 will also help train workers who deliver mental health care to all Californians and help to reduce backlogs in our current system. This is why SEIU 2015 has been calling and mailing our members, as you see right here at the table, to do all we can to support Proposition 1. It's the right thing to do, and we know that California can do better. Isn't that right? Yeah! In addition, Proposition 1 establishes $6.4 billion in new funding for services across the state that will help our most vulnerable, including homeless veterans, get the help they need. So let's go get it, California. Let's vote yes on Proposition 1. Si se puede, vamos a ganar en la Propuesta 1. It's now my pleasure to introduce our dear friend, District Attorney Brooke Jenkins.
Everyone, I'm honored to be here. Good morning, to stand alongside these partners in support of Proposition 1. I first want to thank Governor Newsom for being the visionary behind this ballot initiative. As a prosecutor for almost 10 years now, I fundamentally understand the challenges that people face who come into the criminal justice system. And here in San Francisco, there is a vast majority of our defendants who face mental health issues. And it is incumbent upon us, as not only a city here, but as a state, to invest in the infrastructure that we need to address those issues and to allow these individuals to receive treatment. The state of California, for many years now, has been invested in trying to promote alternatives to incarceration. And we know that putting people in jail does not help treat mental illness. You end up simply releasing them back to the street in the same condition, only for them to cycle back into the system. And so that is why I am 100% committed to supporting this ballot initiative. We want to continue to push for these alternatives so that we can help people get the treatment that they need. It is also not humane to leave those who have not yet entered the criminal justice system on the street to suffer in their illness there. And so again, I urge all of you Californians to get out today and tomorrow to get your ballots in and to support Proposition 1. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam District Attorney, and thank you to California's long-term caregivers, SEIU 2015. Please, you know who does the work. Good morning. In another life, I was a state assembly member who had the privilege of leading the effort to pass the Mental Health Services Act, Proposition 63, back in 2004. And back then, I could only dream of the possibility that a California governor would make improving the mental health system, saving lives, tackling this most challenging issue. I could only dream that someday that might happen. We stand here today in 2024 with a governor who has done more to further the cause of brain-based illnesses, mental illness, than anybody in the state's or even the nation's history. And Proposition 1 is an absolute imperative for this state. It comes closer to the fulfillment of that promise that I think the governor will talk about. That promise made decades ago by former state leaders who said we're going to shut state hospitals and we're going to fund a decent system of community-based mental health care. Now, over the last 20 years or so, the Mental Health Services Act has done good and great things for the people of California. It has generated $31 billion of funding. And the counties and all of the providers have funded a lot of important investments. But Proposition 1 is necessary because if anyone thinks that the status quo is okay, looking out at the people suffering, especially the people suffering in our streets, cycling in and out of jail and prison without getting the help that they need, if anyone else thinks that the status quo is okay, they're not looking at the same reality that the vast majority of Californians are looking at. Proposition 1 will do many things, but primarily it's upfront accountability. It ensures that more of this money is actually spent on chronic homelessness. It ensures that more of this money will be spent on housing support and the right kind of wraparound services. And yes, prevention and early intervention. But proven prevention and early intervention, like intervening in the lives of teenagers who need help early so that they don't suffer that too often inevitable first break. I could not be more bullish and positive, not only about Proposition 1, but when it passes, what it is going to mean to making sure that we no longer have to turn so many people away who just want a better, a safer, and a more dignified life. Yes, on Proposition 1. It is now, has Mayor Breed arrived yet? She has not arrived.
On her way.
So she is on her way. So I'm going to turn it over now to someone who I have known and has been a friend for 30 years, who is a champion of all the right things and all the right causes. Please give a warm welcome to the Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kunala.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you for your leadership on this issue for so long. SEIU 2015, thank you. Thank you for having us here. As Lieutenant Governor, I travel the state of California, and I hear more than anything else the following question. What is the state of California doing? What are our leaders doing about this human rights crisis that is unfolding across our state? Everyone is touched by the mental health and homeless crisis in the state of California. And they are looking for leadership, and they are asking questions. And it's my privilege to bring the governor up here to talk about Proposition 1. But before I do, I want to answer that question a little more fully. For many, many years, the issue of homelessness and mental health has been left to the counties and the cities alone to deal with. But since Governor Newsom, the former mayor of this great city, which, by the way, has struggled with this issue for a long time, since Governor Newsom has come to office, he has answered the question and answered the call. And it's very important that people know that generational problems don't get solved overnight. It takes some time. And in the last 5 years, some of the most impactful policies under Governor Newsom have unfolded. First, in 2 years of budget surplus, Governor Newsom prioritized the allocation of over $15 billion in funding to deal with mental health and homelessness. Second, during COVID-19, when the world was turned upside down, the governor saw an opportunity to help those on the streets by leveraging federal funds into the project Home Key, Project Room Key first, Project Home Key second, and as a result, over 15,000 more beds were secured to help get our homeless off the street, because ultimately, homelessness is a housing problem too. And third, in the face of great questions and some opposition, the governor established care courts, one of the boldest ways to create a system to help those who simply are unable to help themselves. So with Proposition 1, really, Governor, this is the cumulation of 5 years of leadership on this issue, 5 years of answering the call of what are our leaders doing in the state. Proposition 1 will create 11,000 more residential units. It will allocate $1 billion for the Veterans Mental Health Services. And bring over $6 billion in bonds to fix our mental health system. Now, really, this is for the governor to speak to how it is that Proposition 1 is going to answer the call of the moment. But I do just want to reiterate that for many people, and as somebody who's only been in elected office for 5 years, we look to our leaders to solve the biggest problems that come at us. And homelessness and mental health issues, again, they're touching all of us, and they're very challenging. But Proposition 1 is our big chance. And what that means, and what all these volunteers are doing phone banking, is people need to turn their ballots in. They need to vote yes on Proposition 1, turn in those ballots, and support the governor's effort to finally do something meaningful and powerful across the state to deal with this challenge. So with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Governor Gavin.
Thank you. I was joking over here at the mayor. I said, as a former mayor of San Francisco, if I was only a half hour late, I would have been early. She'll be here in a moment. I look forward to introducing the mayor with gratitude and respect to her busy schedule, but also to gratitude and respect to each and every one of you for being here today, particularly on election eve. The election is today and it ends tomorrow, and we are here mindful of the importance, the imperative of getting out to vote at all levels, the local initiatives, the statewide initiatives, the consequential questions we're being asked, the existential questions we're being asked from a national prism, how important it is to exercise your voice, your right, and assert your own identity and leadership by showing up and making a point to move the direction that we are all promoting here today, and that's a more enlightened direction as it relates to the issue that defines more stress, more frustration, in more ways, on more days. And that's the issue of homelessness. That's the issue of what's happening in the streets and sidewalks, not just here in San Francisco, but up and down the state of California, and the issues around mental health. And I'll just say this, I am deeply mindful of how challenging the last few years have been for all of you. None of us are naive about the stress that you have been under with a global pandemic and social unrest, all of the challenges that we face in our body politics, where people seem to be talking past each other or talking down to one another. We have been polarized and we have been traumatized. No doubt about that. And so, number one, I just want to acknowledge all of you, your resiliency. I want to acknowledge the fact that you're here despite all of that negativity, in spite of all of that stress and all of that fear. I want to just thank you for being willing to exercise your voice. I appreciate it.
Invest in our communities.
No on Prop 1.
No on Prop 1. We say
yes
on Prop 1.
Yes
on Prop 1.
Let me, first of all, if I may just say, I appreciate it.
No on privatization.
Why you not letting me talk?
Mental health, you gotta go.
Everybody has the right to talk. We're good.
You gotta go.
Thank you, guys. Let me just give voice to those that have different points of view, because I think that's important, and I appreciate their willingness to express themselves. And I thank them for that. I think Daryl and others said it. The status quo is unacceptable. I think that's one area all of us can agree, including people that may feel differently about this initiative. The status quo is not acceptable. And people are demanding more of us, better of us. People are demanding that we do more than assert ideas and idealism and principles, but we produce real results for real people. There is no compassion stepping over people on the streets and sidewalks. And I know, and I say this with love and respect, I've been dealing with this issue for decades, not as long as Darrell Steinberg, but for decades. A lot of people are dead, but their rights are still intact. And I've never fully understood that completely. Their loved ones desperate to intervene and do something, but they can't. They can't do anything to help folks. Their kids, their loved ones, in and out of institutions. And when they're, on their meds, they seem to be doing well, directionally and otherwise. And then the laws intervene, and people are given so much freedom that, they end up getting the call. And Mayor, you got to get up here because you're coming up in a second. I get it. She just dressed up to suck up to SEIU in purple. She changed her outfit. I'm on to her. Look, let me go back. This is all disjointed. And I'm glad it's not being recorded. But this is a serious moment. And this is a serious issue. There's nothing that animates my why and animates my days more than this issue, and for good reason. And I know the mayor shares that, and I know mayors all up and down the state, increasingly all across the United States of America, agree with that. But let me just punctuate what the president was saying in his opening remarks. I was born in 1967. That was the year that Ronald Reagan took the oath of office to become governor. Ronald Reagan. And it's an interesting fact, a few years before he took that oath of office, we did have a peak of 37,000 psychiatric beds in the state of California. By the time Reagan left office in his second term as governor, we were down to 7,500 beds. 37,000 beds in the 60s, down to, in the 70s, 7,500 beds. Today, just over 5,500 beds. 37,000 with a population in California of 16 million. 5,500 with a population now close to 40 million people. Is it any wonder that we are dealing with this gap and the consequences of fulfilling the original vision that was set out in a bipartisan way in the 60s and 70s? There was a commitment that was never fulfilled to provide step-down facilities, to provide community-based care, and not to replicate the old psychiatric bed model, but to provide the kind of community-based, culturally competent services that we know work to address this issue. It was never fulfilled. What Proposition 1 does is it fulfills that promise. What Proposition 1 does is it advances the resources to address the number one issue, the most vexing issue of all, and that's the issue of housing. We need to stabilize people. We need to deal with the underlying reasons they're out on the streets and sidewalks in the first place. The reason they're self-medicating with drug or alcohol addictions, with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and other challenges that so many people face. Housing is the essential element that has been missing for too long. And what Proposition 1 does is it provides $6.38 billion. It provides for 11,100, as the Lieutenant Governor said, 11,150 new treatment beds and 26,700 new treatment slots. This is unprecedented in California's history. And here's the good news. It doesn't do things the way they've been done, because a lot of folks are out there very cynical. They say, we've heard those things promoted in the past. We've heard you talk a big game in the past. The difference here is we're building on success. successful programs that are working, and successful strategies that allow these programs to work, which includes reforming our permitting, reforming our siting programs so we allowed to make the investments without the opposition becoming so overwhelming that we never actually are able to site these facilities in the first place. We're doing it with more accountability and more transparency. No longer the finger point. It doesn't happen in San Francisco in this context because you're a city and a county. But there's no other city, county in the state, and we have cities pointing past the counties, counties pointing past the cities. It requires one simple plan for every county. Progress reports to the state and annual audits. More accountability, more transparency, more reforms in terms of permitting, and we deliver on this promise at scale to finally address this issue in a meaningful way. And finally, because I know this has gone on too long, I want to just thank, because 20 years ago, Mayor Breed, I was here with Darrell Steinberg. Actually, I was in City Hall downstairs. I think he was down at the elections office about to file the Mental Health Services Act. That was 2004, 20 years ago. And I had the privilege of being there as mayor of San Francisco, one of the first, if not the first mayor to support the Mental Health Services Act. Had it not been for Darrell Steinberg, we would not be here today. Had it not been for Darrell Steinberg's leadership, nation-leading leadership, to address the issue of mental health, where there was no investment, no energy going in that space, period, full stop, we would not be in this privileged position to look back, but not roll back progress, but to look back and adjust to the moment we're in. The world has radically changed in 20 years. It would be very interesting for many reasons, including my dark hair back then, to look at the old press conference from 20 years ago. But we weren't talking about housing. We weren't talking about substance abuse. We were talking about mental health, but without a deeper appreciation of the relationship to those issues. And this reform is about updating the Mental Services Act to make housing eligible and to prioritize the investment to the most chronic and those most in need, to address the issue of those that are duly diagnosed or those that are just struggling with substance abuse that invariably will end up being duly diagnosed, to make substance abuse eligible as well. It also advances a core fundamental principle, and that is we're also recognizing the imperative of prevention. On that housing side, it's about rent subsidies. On the housing side, it is about keeping people in place as well. And so that is a foundational part of this effort, reforming that act without increasing taxes, providing more transparency, $1 billion of ongoing money to addressing the needs of housing, unprecedented supports of capital up front, building on successful programs, streamlining the regulatory process, advancing more measurements of transparency and accountability, and yes, $1 billion to do what we need to do to help our veterans that serve our country. Now we need to service their needs once they come back home. So I couldn't be more proud of this effort. I know good folks can disagree, but no one could disagree with the status quo being acceptable, and that's why we're voting for progress. Please turn out and vote yes on Proposition 1. Yay! And with that, I'd like to introduce the closing act. As a former mayor to the current mayor of the city and county of San Francisco. Ladies and gentlemen, your mayor.
Well, first of all, I want to appreciate all of the people who are here, especially many of the in-home support services workers of SEIU 2015. And of course, special shout out to SEIU 1021 and all the folks who are joining us here as well. You know, I know you've heard all the technical reasons why we should be supporting Proposition 1, but I want to talk about the personal reasons why you should support Proposition 1. And the reason why this is very personal for me has everything to do with growing up in San Francisco and the fact that my family, and in fact my aunt, who had very much challenges since the day she was born, she was developmentally disabled, and we relied heavily on the support from in-home support services workers and a lot of other services that helped her, Golden Gate Regional, and I can name a West Side Clinic. I mean, I can go on and on about the list of services that were there for her.
But when my grandmother started to develop dementia, it became increasingly difficult to get my aunt the services and the support that she needed. It was challenging to work and navigate through the system, but also we didn't have the financial resources to do so. Eventually, we were able to get the help that we needed. It took years. Eventually, we were able to get my grandmother in Laguna Honda Hospital, where she was cared for to the end of her days. And the reason why this is important to note is because there are so many people out there who are still waiting, who are waiting years, who may not have an advocate fighting for them. Had it not been for me and some of my other family members and the community, then I don't know what would have happened to my grandmother or my aunt. I truly believe my aunt could have easily been on the streets of San Francisco, struggling without a bed, without the support necessary to ensure she was cared for. We have so many people who lead different levels of care, whether it's those who develop some sort of mental health challenge because of substance use disorder, or whether it's someone who was born with it, or what have you. There are a lot of different layers to this, which means we need a lot of different layers of different kinds of facilities. Right. More than ever before. In San Francisco, we have about 2,200 beds. When I first started as mayor, we added another 350, and we are doing all of this with some level of support for the state, but it is hard and it is expensive. And not to mention, the locked facilities are extremely expensive. We talk about our jails should not be a place for those struggling with mental illness. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have right now. And we have very, very limited number of locked facilities of people who really need that kind of care and that kind of support. So I appreciate the fact that we are all here. Darrell Steinberg drove way from Sacramento. The governor drove way from Sacramento. Our lieutenant governor drove way from Sacramento. Our DA drove right from down the street. We got doctors, we got clinicians, we got people who actually are on the ground doing the work. Elected leaders, we lead, we provide the vehicle for the support necessary, but the people in this room, so many of you, you are the ones who understand the need for this, the significant need for the resources, the dollars necessary to increase our capacity significantly to address the needs. And I want to really thank the governor for his support of not just care courts, but the reforms to our conservatorship systems and the work that we need to do. But once we get people in care, what's next? Where do they go? How do they get the support that they need? Proposition 1 is the answer to the resources we need to increase our capacity and to make sure that we don't leave anyone on the streets who we know clearly are suffering from a mental health breakdown or any other issues that exist in this mental health care field. After the pandemic, we know that there have been challenges. We are still experiencing the impacts. We have seen things become completely, especially around fentanyl, things become even more devastating. And this is a proposition that will help us get people into the help and the support they need. There's so many layers to this. There's so much opportunity to this. And there's so much necessary change in order to move our city and our state forward. So we ask you all to vote yes on Proposition 1.